Welcome to On the Way Classroom with Tony Crisp. Each weekday, Monday through Friday, Dr. Crisp will teach the Bible from its historical, geographical, linguistic, and cultural context. Tune in daily to start your day right and to deepen your understanding of how to better walk the way and enjoy the journey. Now, here's your host, Dr. Tony Crisp.
Welcome to On the Way Classroom. I'm Tony Crisp, and today we are going to look at the 10th and final period of the divisions of the Old Testament, as I have divided the entire Tanakh, the Old Testament, into 10 time frames, 10 time periods or divisions. Now let's go back and review before we get into this last session. The first time period is the primeval period. The second period is the patriarchal period. The third period is the period of the Exodus. The fourth period is the period of conquest. The fifth period is the period of the judges. The sixth period is the period of the United Kingdom. The seventh period is the period of the divided kingdom. The eighth period is the period of the single kingdom. The ninth period is the period of exile or captivity. And the 10th period is the period that we're looking at today, and that is the period of restoration. Now let's take 30 to 60 seconds to deal with where we were the last time. When I left you in the last session, we had talked about the three phases of Nebuchadnezzar's assault upon the kingdom of Judah and its capital, Jerusalem. In 605 BC, after conquering all of the northern Syrian kingdom, he came to Jerusalem and took away, on his way back to Babylon, he took away all of the elite and the intelligentsia, the king's family, away to exile and captivity in Babylon. He put them in a training school that you can read about in Daniel chapter 1. And that was Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, along with many others that were taken to captivity. In 597 BC, then Nebuchadnezzar came back, and when he came back to Jerusalem, he took away almost all of the people that had value to him, that were not really what he looked upon as the rejects or the discards of the Judean culture. And so along with the people, he took the prophet Ezekiel, and they were in the land between the rivers in Latin Mesopotamia. And so that is where Ezekiel gave his great prophecies in what we call the prophet Ezekiel. And then Jeremiah was left behind in Jerusalem as the great prophet of the exile who was living in Jerusalem. And Jeremiah lived before the period of the captivity, during the period of the single kingdom, gave many of his great prophecies during that time. But he was also present during the destruction of the temple, gave prophecies related to that and what was going to happen. And all of this time, Daniel and Ezekiel and Jeremiah are prophesying. Daniel was telling the people exactly what God had shown him about the future. And you can read about in Daniel chapter 2 and in Daniel chapter 7, the eternal view of God's kingdom as it would be from the days of Nebuchadnezzar all the way to the present day in which we're living. Now, that view is given from man's perspective in the book of Daniel, chapter 2, where Nebuchadnezzar dreamed a great dream of a great colossus, and you remember its head was gold, its chest and arms were silver, and so forth. These metals deteriorated as you went down toward the feet. And Daniel gave that, and that was the view of the world kingdoms from then until now and in the future from man's perspective, a great colossus, man the center of everything. However, the same view of the same kingdoms is given from a different perspective in chapter 7, where Daniel sees a vision of the kingdom not as a great man in Colossus, but as wild beast, a ravaging beast, horrible, ugly beast. That is the nature of sin within mankind and the nature of the kingdoms that will try to rule against the God of heaven and earth and the creator of everything. All of this took place during the days of the exile. Now, when we read in the book of Daniel about Belshazzar, which you remember by the handwriting on the wall, do you remember what happened? A great party was given. As that great party continued, drunkenness overwhelmed them. And the king said, go get those special dishes and those chalices from the kingdom of Judah and the great temple of the God of the Jews. And let's put wine in them and celebrate how we are the conquerors. And God said that's the last straw. And he sent his finger and wrote on the wall, you have been weighed in the balances, king, and you have come up short. And so that night, the kingdom was torn from their hands by a Persian by the name of Cyrus. In 539 BC, Cyrus came in and conquered the city of Babylon basically without firing a shot. And it's a fascinating way that they conquered the city, but all of that is recorded in the book of Daniel. Then when Cyrus came to power, he looked around and said, who are all these people from everywhere? And Cyrus, just like the Babylonians and just like the Assyrians before him, he had a strategy for keeping people loyal to him and to keep them from rebelling. The Assyrians, as you recall, their strategy was to separate people where that nobody had familiarity, no one was speaking the same language, and that's the way they kept the people in check. Nebuchadnezzar wanted everybody under his own rule, and so that's why you have the great Colossus that he built and the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being put into a fiery furnace. All of that was part of Nebuchadnezzar's strategy to intimidate the people and rule them by force. But Cyrus, even though he was a great general, a war general, and a great one at that, he didn't rule that way. He said, I want to send the people back from where they came from and let them till the soil and prosper so that they can be under tribute to me and send back all of their riches. And that's exactly what he did. He destroyed Babylon, conquered Babylon rather, in 539 BC. 1 year later, in 538 BC, he gave the great decree for the Jews to go home, and he told them to go home, rebuild the temple, and I'll pay for it. And when you get that temple built, I want you to remember me before your God, the God of heaven and earth, Yah, and I want you to be loyal to me. And so 538, that decree was given. All the people started gathering together. But between 538 and 535, only about 50,000 people went back. Only about 50,000 out of all the nation of Israel, the tribe of Judah, went back. And that was a hard trek for them. Many of them had been there for decades and had already gotten into a routine of life. And remember, Jeremiah the prophet from Jerusalem had written a letter. It's written in the book of Jeremiah that you can read that says, God said, you're going to be there a while, so you need to assimilate in with the people. That is, not assimilate as in forget your God, but enjoy the place where you are. Pray for the leadership. Pray for the rulers of the city, because if the city prospers, you'll prosper. You can read about this in the Word of God itself. And so the people did that. Now that they were going home, many of them didn't want to go home. And so after 3 years, only 50,000 were back, but they had enough material, they had enough people and skilled personnel, and Cyrus had loaded them down with all of the vessels and so forth that had been brought by Nebuchadnezzar to Babylon. He sent them back home with all of that. And in 535 BC, those 50,000 plus that went back, they laid the foundation of the temple. It took them a year to clean the debris, get everything back, and so they laid the foundation of the temple, and they worked hard for a year, and then they were trying to work and build up their own houses and so forth, and they got carried away and forgot their priority. Their priority, God had sent them back there to build the temple, the central worship center, but they got sidetracked, and for 14 years, just the foundation was laid, and the rest of the people just went back to building their own houses. We would say building their own kingdom, providing for their family, providing riches for themselves. They were getting richer and richer, and the house of God was in ruins. Only the foundation was there. So in about 522, 521, God sent two fiery prophets that you can read their books. Zechariah is one of them. He has a longer book, but Haggai only has a very short book, and we cut all of these into chapters. But Haggai said, look, God's not going to bless you, and you're going to have inflation that is so rampant that you're going to go out and build your kingdom, and you're going to make a lot of money, but when you come in, I'm going to make it as though you have holes in your pocket. It's as though you hold out your money and it is just blown away by the wind. It's not going to be worth anything because you have forsaken the reason that I brought you into existence to begin with, and that's to worship me. You get back up there to Jerusalem and build the worship center where I can be the center of everything, and Jerusalem can once again be the center of this country. And when you do that, I will bless you. Zechariah came in, and not only did he talk about the kingdom then and what they need to do, and how he would bless the people if they would build the temple, the worship center, but that he would raise up Messiah in the future that would rule over not only Jerusalem and Judah and Israel, but the entire earth. And you can read about that in the prophet Zechariah. Now, why am I telling you this? Because when the people were in a state of melees, God sent prophets that preached the truth of God to a nation, and God turned around a nation and their direction through the men of God that he had raised up that preached the truth of God and called them to repentance. And so that happened during the days of Haggai and Zechariah, and in 520, what they'd started in 535 and quit in 534, for 14 years they did nothing. In 520, they started in 4 years, they finished it and dedicated the temple. You can read about that in Ezra, in the book of 2 Chronicles, and the lead up to that. You can read about it in the words of God, and as you do, you're going to see a miraculous thing take place. People, according to the scriptures, were praising God when that temple was dedicated in 516, that second temple. But they were also weeping because some were still alive, old men that were still alive, that saw the first temple before it was destroyed and knew what a glorious structure it was. And even though this was a temple and they were grateful for it, it was not what it had been before. And so there was weeping and there was a rejoicing to the point where you couldn't tell what was what. But this is the end of the period of the exile. Now, when we start in next week's sessions, I'm going to deal with the intertestamental period, what is called the silent 400 years. And you are not going to want to miss this, because I don't believe that you can understand properly the New Testament and its shades and nuances and the depth of it without understanding the period between the Testaments. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to On the Way Classroom with Dr. Tony Crisp. Tune in each weekday for more information on how to read, study, and understand the Bible. If you have questions, please write to questions@tonycrisp.org. That's questions@tonycrisp.org. Questions@tonycrisp.org. Thanks for listening and have a blessed day on the way.